We are very close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, but I still need your support. Please don't forget to take a second and subscribe to my channel. The air over Bayonne Parish carried the copper taste of rain long before the hurricane warnings turned from scrolling text to shouted orders. On August 28, 2005, with the Gulf waters surging and every radio repeating the same evacuation routes, 28-year-old line cook Marcus Duvall wiped his hands on a dish towel and told his boss he'd be gone by sunrise. He was small-boned, fast-moving, the kind of cook who could run a grill, a fryer, and a pan of étouffée without burning a thing. For 6 years, he'd worked the night shift at Gator Jack's on the edge of the Parish Line, serving truckers and refinery workers who preferred the dim lights and cheap beer to the polished diners along the interstate. That Sunday evening, Gator Jack's was closing early. Customers left with phone boxes and warnings to stay safe. The television above the bar played continuous footage of Highway 90 packed with brake lights stretching east. Marcus watched the screen without seeing it, thinking of his mother's house in Thibodaux, inland and safer, and of the blue aluminum bridge that rose just 2 miles south, spanning the marsh between Bayonne and Cameron Parish. The bridge had always fascinated him, the way it lifted clean from the swamp like something mechanical and alive. He clocked out at 9:14 p.m., signed his name on the grease-stained ledger, and told the dishwasher he was heading home to pack. The last person to see him alive was waitress Jolene Dupré, who stepped outside for a cigarette as Marcus locked the side door. She remembered the way his duffel strap dug into his shoulder and how the storm-thick air flattened his curls against his forehead. He'd smiled, said, "See you after the wind dies," and disappeared into the sodium glow of the parking lot. At 9:47 p.m., according to the traffic camera later recovered from parish servers, Marcus's 1997 Ford Ranger crossed the drawbridge heading south toward the marina. It was the wrong direction, away from the evacuation routes, away from safety. The timestamp placed him less than an hour before mandatory curfew. After that, the bridge was locked down, draw raised for boat passage as water levels climbed. The next morning, when wind still howled through the mangroves and pieces of tin roofing skittered down empty streets, the truck was found abandoned on the far side of the bridge near Pelican Bay Marina. One window cracked, doors locked, keys missing. Inside were Marcus's wallet, his chef's knife roll, and a half-finished cup of gas station coffee. The passenger seat held a rain-soaked note torn from an order pad. "Back soon, don't worry." The sheriff's office marked the scene at 7:22 a.m., though even the deputies admitted the paperwork was half-hearted with the storm still pounding the coast. They towed the truck to the impound lot, logged the note, and promised to reopen the case when communications returned. But by the time the parish dried out, hundreds of people were missing, displaced, or unaccounted for, and a single line cook from Bayonne didn't make front-page news. Marcus's mother, Viola Duvall, reported him missing on September 6th, when Red Cross volunteers confirmed he wasn't on any evacuation lists. She drove the flooded back roads herself, posting Xeroxed flyers to telephone poles, her son's photo smeared by humidity within hours. When she reached the marina, weeks later, the smell of rot still clung to the pilings. Boats lay half-sunk, fuel rainbowing the water. The bait shop's door hung crooked, its windows boarded from the inside. Viola knocked anyway, calling her son's name into the damp silence until a man stepped out from behind the counter. His name was Raymond Ray LeClaire, 59, owner of the Pelican Bay Bait and Tackle. He was wiry, sun-bleached, with hands permanently stained by engine oil. He'd lived there his whole life, one of those coastal men who measured time by fishing seasons and storms. He told Viola he'd seen Marcus once or twice, said the kid sometimes bought night crawlers for his uncle's catfish lines, but not that night. "Bridge was closed," he said. "Nobody sane was out in that weather." He offered her coffee, pointed to the missing person flyer, and promised to keep an eye out. For the next decade, eye out was all Bayonne Parish law enforcement could manage. The flood destroyed records, displaced families, and erased timelines. Marcus's files shifted from active search to administrative hold to cold case storage before the 10th anniversary of the storm. When Detective Althea Broussard inherited the cold case unit in 2017, she found Marcus's folder wedged between unpaid fines and an abandoned property inventory. The photographs were water-stained, the witness statements incomplete, and the evidence list handwritten on the back of a FEMA form. What caught her attention wasn't the missing person flyer or the faded truck photos. It It was an item line added in 2006. After the initial report, metal tackle box, corroded, found under Dock 3. Contents destroyed. There were no photos, no lab results, and no explanation why a tackle box had been linked to the case of a missing cook. Broussard requested the evidence from the parish storage locker, only to find the tackle box sealed in plastic and labeled unprocessed storm debris. When she opened it, the smell of rust and swamp gas filled the room. Inside, beneath layers of silt, she found a single piece of laminated paper, a bait shop receipt dated August 28, 2005, 9:52 p.m., time-stamped 3 minutes after Marcus's truck had crossed the bridge. The signature line bore 2 smeared letters. M.D. Broussard stared at the slip until her coffee went cold. In a parish where entire neighborhoods had vanished underwater, that receipt was a voice rising through mud, whispering that someone had been at the marina after curfew. Someone alive. She logged the evidence, reopened the file, and began retracing the final minutes before the storm swallowed the parish whole. The first stop would be the man who'd poured Viola Duvall that cup of coffee 12 years earlier, Ray LeClaire, who still ran Pelican Bay Bait and Tackle, still kept his windows boarded, and still, according to public records, held master keys to every dock along the Parish Line. Outside, the bay wind carried the same metallic scent Marcus had noticed the night he vanished. The storm had long passed, but the water never truly left Bayonne Parish. It waited beneath the bridges and in the shadows of the pilings, holding onto its secrets, patient as the tide. Detective Althea Broussard drove into Pelican Bay on a morning that looked like any other along the southern Louisiana marsh, the air thick enough to chew, the clouds hanging low over the reeds. The GPS lost signal half a mile from the marina, which was fine. She knew this stretch of the parish by instinct. She'd grown up 40 minutes inland, daughter of a shrimper who'd rebuilt the same house 3 times after hurricanes had taken it. Bayonne Parish didn't erase memory. It drowned it, pressed it down into silt until it surfaced years later in ways no one expected. The bait shop stood where it always had, slanted porch, chipped sign, smell of diesel and brine. The same hand-painted lettering that had once read Pelican Bay Bait and Tackle, live shrimp daily, was barely legible now, the paint eaten by salt and sun. Inside, the floorboards groaned under her boots, warped from years of humidity. The walls were lined with cracked tackle boxes, faded photographs of men holding fish, and handwritten notes advertising minnow prices. Behind the counter stood Raymond LeClaire. He was thinner than the old photos in the file suggested, but the eyes were the same. Small, pale, unblinking, like a heron's. He recognized her badge before she said a word. "You folks already picked this place clean back in '06, he said, wiping his hands on a rag that might once have been white. "Don't tell me you lost another one." Broussard introduced herself and told him she was reviewing cases that hadn't seen daylight since the floods. He shrugged, his shoulders narrow and sharp under a faded LSU t-shirt. "Plenty went missing that year," he said. "Water took most of them." She placed the evidence bag on the counter, the laminated receipt inside catching the light from the fly-specked window. "This was found under your dock," she said. "August 28, 2005, 9:52 p.m. LeClaire squinted at it. "So?" "So," she said. "That's 3 minutes after a man named Marcus Duvall crossed the bridge in a truck that was later found parked right out front." He leaned closer. "Never heard of him." Broussard watched his eyes. No flicker of recognition, no quick swallow. Just the slow rhythm of someone who'd rehearsed denial for years. "Funny," she said. "Your bait shop was one of only 2 businesses with power that night. Generator in the back. You logged 3 cash sales between 9:30 and 10, but only 2 names on the register. This receipt makes 3, he gave a dry laugh. "Honey, I don't keep track of every fool who buys worms." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's the thing. It wasn't worms. Receipt says 1 gallon of regular, 1 packet of coffee filters, and a quart of motor oil." Now there was a pause. Just a second, but enough for Broussard to note the slight tightening of his jaw. "Maybe he was fixing a boat," LeClaire said. "Maybe," she agreed. Except the marina was closed, and he didn't own a boat. The silence between them filled with the sound of the bay lapping against the pilings outside. Broussard left the evidence bag on the counter, thanked him for his time, and stepped back into the wet sunlight. She knew better than to press too hard too soon. Men like LeClaire didn't confess under questions. They unraveled under quiet. She drove to the parish records office, a converted elementary school still half empty from post-Katrina relocation. The marina's maintenance logs were stacked in a mildew-streaked file room, pages stuck together from years of damp storage. Most of the 2005 entries were useless, water-stained, illegible, but one ledger survived. September 3, 2005. Handwriting slanted and deliberate. It listed bilge pump maintenance for docks 1 through 6, signed R. Leclerc. Beneath dock 3, someone had scrawled in pencil, cleared line, foreign obstruction. No one had ever followed up on that note. Broussard photographed the page and checked the chain of custody for the tackle box recovered from dock 3 a year later. The entry said only, found wedged between pilings, partially buried. No description of who found it, no record of who called it in. When she cross-referenced the contact number listed for the retrieval crew, she found it belonged to Leclerc himself. The next morning, she brought a forensics team to Pelican Bay under the pretext of updating post-storm environmental assessments. The docks looked harmless enough, their planks gray and uneven, the water below opaque with silt. A heron stood motionless on the railing, watching as technicians lowered probes into the shallows. Broussard crouched near dock 3, her fingers tracing the corroded bolts, and saw something glinting in the crevice where the tide met the wood. She reached down with a gloved hand and pulled out a sliver of aluminum, flaked, but still stamped with faint letters. Ford, vehicle debris, possibly from Marcus's truck. She logged the coordinates, tagged the item, and sent it to the parish lab for elemental comparison. That evening, as she wrote her report, she checked the vehicle impound records. The Ford Ranger had been released to family in 2006, Viola Duvall, and later sold for scrap in Baton Rouge. The recycling yard records showed the VIN stamped as incomplete due to corrosion. When she tracked down the yard manager, he confirmed something stranger. The truck's undercarriage had been unusually clean, as though it had been pressure washed before pickup. Pressure washed, in a parish still underwater. Broussard drove home through twilight, mind racing. Someone had gone to effort to sanitize that vehicle. Someone who understood evidence or feared it. The next day, she requested environmental test results from the debris in the tackle box. The report, barely legible from old printouts, noted trace petroleum compounds inconsistent with marine origin, possible diesel residue. When she ran that through the parish's chemical use permits for 2005, only one facility matched, Pelican Bay Marina, which had maintained its own diesel tanks and pumps. The tanks had been inspected once after the storm by the same man who signed every maintenance log, Ray Leclerc. By the time Broussard returned to the bait shop, the afternoon tide was rising. Leclerc was outside, scraping barnacles from a John boat hull. "Detective again," he said, not looking up. "You keep good records, Mr. Leclerc," she said. "Right down to your bilge maintenance." "Someone has to. You noted a foreign obstruction in Dock 3 a week after the storm. What was it?" He shrugged. "Could have been driftwood. Could have been a dead gator. We pulled all sorts of things that month." "Who's we?" He hesitated. "Me and a few of the boys, volunteers. Names?" "Don't remember." "Long time ago?" Broussard's voice softened. "You pulled up a tackle box that belonged to Marcus Duvall. Did you open it?" He met her gaze, something defiant and tired flickering there. "Lady, I didn't kill your cook." The directness of it hit her like a slap. "I didn't say you did. You came here looking to solve something the storm already buried. But some things down here you let the tide keep." He turned back to his work, scraping slow, rhythmic strokes. "That boy drove off the bridge, same as plenty others. The water took him." End of story. Broussard knew deflection when she heard it. She left him to his ghosts and called in a favor from the state police. Within a week, sonar teams swept the channel beneath the Blue Bridge. On the third pass, they found an anomaly 20 yards from the western piling, a large, irregular mass partly embedded in the silt. Divers went down, surfacing with a half-collapsed storage drum wrapped in chains. Inside were bone fragments, degraded cloth, and the remains of a leather shoe. The lab dated the bones as male, mid-20s to early 30s. DNA extraction was difficult, but partial sequences matched samples from Viola Duvall's voluntary submission in 2005. Marcus. News traveled through Bayonne Parish like heat through tin. The boy who vanished before the storm had been found at last, or what was left of him. But discovery brought questions sharper than grief. How had his remains ended up beneath the bridge if his truck was parked miles away? Who had sealed him inside a drum heavy enough to resist hurricane tides? And who had known where to hide it so that the storm itself would bury the evidence deeper? Broussard called Leclerc in for formal questioning 2 days after the lab confirmation. He arrived in the same stained work shirt, smelling of salt and diesel. During the interview, he insisted he'd been home the night before the storm, securing his property, generator running. When she presented the receipt, he claimed someone must have stolen his sales pad. When she showed him the marina logs, he said he didn't remember writing them. When she told him Marcus's remains were recovered directly beneath Dock 3, he only blinked once before whispering, "Tide brings up all sorts of trash." The interrogation lasted 6 hours. He asked for no lawyer, offered no confession, only weary amusement at each new revelation. Broussard left the room feeling the same frustration that had haunted every cold case detective before her, the gap between knowing and proving. But she had one more angle. Parish archives showed that after the storm, the marina had received federal repair funds. To claim them, Leclerc submitted invoices for replacement of missing keys and locks. Every dock gate, every storage unit, every shed. The keys had been reported lost in flood. Broussard tracked down the locksmith who'd done the work, a retired man named Ed Mouton. His handwriting matched the invoice signatures, but when shown photos of Leclerc, he frowned. "That's not who hired me," he said. "Was a younger guy. Said he worked here. Paid cash. Can you describe him?" Broussard asked. Mouton nodded slowly. Light-skinned black fella, maybe mid-20s. Nervous. Kept looking at the bridge while we worked. Marcus Duvall had been 28. Broussard sat in her car afterward, watching rain streak the windshield, the pieces twisting together like torn netting. If the locksmith's memory was accurate, Marcus himself might have been at the marina earlier that day, changing locks, handling keys. But why? Gator Jack's payroll records offered a clue. Marcus had been moonlighting as a part-time dockhand for cash that summer, a job arranged through the marina office. The signature on his last payslip, dated August 27th, belonged to Leclerc. Marcus had gone there the night before the storm, not by accident, but by appointment. Broussard drove home through wind that smelled of brackish decay. The storm sirens were long gone, but she could still feel their echo, an invisible pressure in the chest, a low frequency that never quite stopped humming once you'd lived through it. The parish had learned to rebuild roads and houses, but not trust. Every face in Bayonne carried the same look when she asked about that night. A flicker of knowledge buried beneath practiced ignorance. She poured herself coffee that went cold before she could drink it, staring at the receipt again. The ink had bled into blue veins that looked almost organic, like rivers feeding a delta. Somewhere in those numbers lay the sequence of decisions that ended Marcus's life. Somewhere between 9:47 and 10 o'clock, on a bridge that rose like a spine over black water, something had gone wrong. The next morning she received a call from the state lab. The residue inside the storage drum contained a blend of diesel and industrial degreaser, the same combination used in marina pump maintenance. And embedded in one corner of the drum's interior was a single flake of blue paint, matched to the color used on Pelican Bay's dock rails. Broussard stared at the report until her vision blurred. The storm had washed away almost everything, records, witness memories, the very ground. But it had left enough for the truth to surface. The water was giving back its secrets, one fragment at a time. By the third week of the reopened investigation, Detective Althea Broussard had spent more hours among the humidity-swollen archives of Bayonne Parish than she had in her own apartment. The smell of mold clung to her clothes, the paper's edges turned soft between her fingers. Yet she couldn't shake the sense that the answer sat waiting somewhere in the administrative rubble, just beyond the next mislabeled folder. The discovery of Marcus Duvall's remains beneath Dock 3 had cracked something open in the parish. The illusion that Katrina had erased the past clean. It hadn't. It had only hidden it beneath mud and paperwork. Broussard began by reconstructing the marina's operations before the storm. In 2005, Pelican Bay Marina had been more than a bait shop. It served as an informal logistics hub for evacuation efforts, a place where locals filled gas cans, bought ice, and checked weather bulletins on a flickering television powered by Leclerc's generator. The sheriff's office had even authorized Leclerc to keep the bridge's auxiliary radio open in case emergency vessels needed clearance during the hurricane watch. It meant that one man, an unvetted civilian, held the keys to both the marina and the drawbridge control shack. When Broussard requested the bridge's mechanical logs from the parish infrastructure department, the clerk looked apologetic. Most of the files were lost in flood damage. But there was a duplicate set stored on microfilm at the state archives in Baton Rouge. She made the 2-hour drive in silence, rain tracing thin lines down the windshield. The highway cutting through endless flatland where telephone poles leaned like weary sentinels. The microfilm reader whined to life in a dim corner of the archives building. Row after row of typed entries scrolled past, routine maintenance, oil inspections, hydraulic pressure checks. Then she reached August 28, 2005. The operator's log noted the bridge being lowered at 9:30 p.m., raised again at 10:03 p.m., then manually locked in open position at 10:15 p.m. The signature box bore initials not of any registered bridge operator but 3 simple letters. R.L. Broussard exhaled slowly. That timestamp placed the raising of the bridge precisely 16 minutes after Marcus's truck crossed it southbound, which meant he'd had no way back once it lifted. Anyone pursuing him or luring him would have known he was trapped on the far side, cut off from the evacuation route. The initials confirmed what she'd suspected. Leclerc had been there, controlling the mechanism himself. She copied the frame, printed it, and stared at the grainy letters until her pulse steadied. Motive still eluded her. Marcus wasn't valuable, wasn't dangerous, wasn't someone with enemies. But money had a way of threading through the smallest towns, especially in those months when federal relief funds poured in faster than anyone could track. Her next stop was the Bayonne Parish auditor's office, where she combed through FEMA reimbursement records from 2005 to 2006. Pelican Bay Marina appeared repeatedly, reimbursement for fuel distribution, for generator maintenance, for dock security upgrades. Each invoice carried Leclerc's signature and a notarization from a parish official named Harold Destrehan. The problem was that Destrehan had died in the storm 2 days before the documents were filed. Fraud, Broussard thought. Relief fund fraud, and Marcus had stumbled into it. The part-time dockhand, eager for cash, must have discovered that the paperwork was falsified, maybe while helping Leclerc prepare the invoices. A confrontation, an argument, a panicked attempt to silence him before the authorities arrived. It was a theory, thin but tangible, and it explained the mixture of fear and calculation evident in the way Marcus's death had been staged. Still, theory wasn't proof. Broussard needed something concrete to bridge the gap between suspicion and indictment. That's when she remembered a line from the original sheriff's report. Security footage unavailable. Hard drive damaged by flood. It had never occurred to anyone that the drive might still exist. She called the defunct electronics supplier listed on the marina's 2004 invoice for surveillance installation. To her surprise, the owner was still in business. "We used those old Pelican units?" he said. "Came with mirrored backups. We kept copies of all installs for liability. Might still have it on our server if Katrina didn't fry the array." An hour later, Broussard stood in a warehouse office smelling of solder and ozone, watching as the technician loaded an ancient archive onto his screen. The footage, grainy and time-stamped, displayed the marina's front lot on August 28, 2005. For the first few minutes, the scene was empty except for the wind-whipped flags and a single pickup parked near the bait shop. At 9:49 p.m., headlights appeared across the bridge. Marcus's Ford Ranger rolled into frame, stopped beside the pump, and idled. He stepped out, duffel over his shoulder. Another figure emerged from the bait shop, a man in coveralls, heavy-set, holding something metallic that caught the security light. They exchanged words. Marcus gestured toward the water. Then the figure led him toward Dock 3. At 10:02 p.m., both men vanished from view. The next image came at 10:14 p.m., when the same man returned alone, dragging something behind him, a bundle darkened by rain and shadow. He heaved it into a boat moored at the slip, climbed aboard, and pushed off into the channel. The boat's stern carried a stenciled registration number half obscured by glare, but the first 2 characters were clear enough. PB, Pelican Bay's own maintenance skiff. Broussard's throat tightened. "Can you enhance that?" she asked. The technician zoomed. The man's face bloomed into rough focus, weathered features, thinning hair plastered to his forehead, jaw set in grim determination. It was unmistakably Raymond LeClaire. She took the footage straight to the district attorney. But while the image placed LeClaire with Marcus at the marina, it didn't show the act itself, only implication. Prosecutors wanted cause of death, a weapon, confession, something irrefutable. In the absence of that, all Broussard could do was keep pressing. She returned to Pelican Bay with a search warrant 3 days later. Deputies photographed every corner of the bait shop, collected soil samples from beneath Dock 3, pried open lockers that hadn't been touched in years. In one of them, behind a stack of mildewed life vests, Broussard found a cardboard box filled with ledgers and receipts from 2005. Handwritten inventory lists, purchase orders, fuel tallies. Tucked between 2 pages was an envelope marked confidential, bridge maintenance. Inside lay a key on a rusted ring stamped BRG Ctrl02 and a folded piece of notepaper. The paper bore a single line, written in Marcus's precise block lettering. "You said I'd get paid after the bridge run. Don't lie to me, Ray." It was the first physical connection between victim and suspect. Broussard photographed everything, sealed the envelope, and felt the weight of the evidence settle in her chest. The words suggested a transaction, a promise, perhaps blackmail. Marcus might have threatened to expose the fraudulent bridge logs unless LeClaire paid him his share. If so, the confrontation at Dock 3 had not been random but deliberate. A meeting turned fatal. That night, Broussard drove the parish roads again, following Marcus's last route. The bridge loomed ahead, blue steel ribs glistening in the mist. When she parked at the base and killed her headlights, she could hear the water moving beneath, steady and slow, as though whispering names it hadn't finished with. She walked onto the deck, her flashlight beam tracing rust patterns along the rail. Halfway across, she saw a faint groove in the paint, an old indentation shaped like a key ring scraped hard against metal. The mark pointed toward the control shack, a small box of corrugated steel perched beside the machinery. She tried the recovered key. It fit. Inside, the shack smelled of oil and mildew. Dust motes drifted in her beam. On the desk sat an old binder labeled Bridge Ops, 2005. Most of the pages were ruined, but one sheet near the back remained dry, laminated against moisture. It listed a schedule of bridge raises and maintenance signatures identical to the microfilm logs. But in the margin, written faintly in pencil, someone had scribbled 1003, keep raised until Ray calls, HD. The initials matched the deceased parish official, Harold Destrehan, the same man whose signature appeared posthumously on LeClaire's FEMA invoices. The realization hit Broussard like the sudden smell of ozone before lightning. LeClaire hadn't acted alone. Someone inside the parish administration had helped him manipulate the bridge schedule that night, perhaps in exchange for a share of the fraudulent relief funds. Destrehan's death during the storm may have erased the paper trail, but the margin note survived. She filed her report at dawn. By afternoon, the DA approved a warrant for LeClaire's arrest on charges of manslaughter, evidence tampering, and federal relief fraud. When deputies arrived at Pelican Bay, the bait shop was empty, the generator still humming, a coffee cup half full on the counter. Behind the building, tire tracks led down the embankment toward the channel. A patrol boat found LeClaire's skiff drifting half a mile east, its engine dead, his boots still on deck. The water around it shimmered with an oil slick, and the man himself was gone. For 48 hours the parish searched, helicopters combing the marshland, divers sweeping the currents. They found no body. Locals muttered that the bay had taken him the way it had taken so many others. But Broussard knew better. The tide was patient. It would return what it was owed. In the weeks that followed, federal auditors reopened every storm-related reimbursement file connected to Bayonne Parish. Dozens of discrepancies surfaced, but none tied directly to anyone still living. The official record listed LeClaire as missing presumed drowned. The case of Marcus Duvall was closed with partial resolution, pending recovery of the suspect. But Broussard couldn't let it rest. Late one evening, cleaning her desk, she noticed a sealed envelope among her incoming mail. No return address. Inside was a water-stained Polaroid of the Blue Bridge at sunset, the water calm, the reflection perfectly mirrored. On the back, written in an unfamiliar hand, "You still don't know what was in the second drum." Broussard stared at the photograph until the office clock marked midnight. Outside, thunder rolled in from the Gulf, low and steady, as if the bay itself were breathing. The bridge waited, blue against the gathering dark, and somewhere beneath it the water turned, keeping count. The photograph arrived without fingerprints, postage, or explanation. A single Polaroid sealed in a plain envelope, no writing on the front, only the message on the back. You still don't know what was in the second drum. Detective Althea Broussard studied it for hours. She turned it under lamplight, ran her fingers along the chemical glaze, even sniffed it for the faint scent of developer fluid. Whoever sent it knew something intimate about the case. The first drum had contained Marcus Duvall's remains, sealed, in rust and silt beneath Dock 3. If there was a second, it might hold everything else, the missing pieces of the story that refused to fit. She took the Polaroid to the state lab. The technician confirmed it was genuine film stock manufactured in 2006, a year after Marcus vanished. That meant the photograph was taken long after the floodwaters receded. The blue of the bridge, the angle of light, the exposed piling, all matched the southern side of Pelican Bay Marina. A timestamp faintly embossed along the border read 10/12/06/1842. Whoever had taken it had returned to the site quietly, long after the case had gone cold. Broussard reopened her field notes and mapped every coordinate where evidence had been recovered. The first drum lay 20 yards west of the western piling. If a second existed, logic suggested symmetry, something placed to the east. The next morning, she filed a request with the state dive unit for another sweep. The bay water had turned opaque with spring runoff, the current sluggish but deceptive. For 2 days, divers found nothing except beer cans, propeller fragments, and hurricane debris. On the third day, sonar registered a faint echo at 32 feet, metallic, cylindrical, half buried. They raised it carefully, chains creaking against the crane, until the drum broke the surface, trailing ribbons of mud. Unlike the first, this one was dented along one side, the lid fused by corrosion. When the technicians pried it open, the stench that rolled out silenced everyone on deck. Inside lay a tangle of soaked plastic files, laminated sheets, and a metal clipboard stamped with the parish seal. No bones this time, only paper. Back in the evidence room, Broussard laid out each document under the fume hood. Pages peeled apart like layers of onion skin. She recognized FEMA reimbursement forms, bridge maintenance logs, and handwritten invoices identical to those Leclerc had submitted in 2005. But these were drafts, unedited, unnotarized, raw. Scrawled across the top of one page were the words, Ray, run these through D before filing. He'll sign anything if the numbers match. The handwriting was not Leclerc's. It was slanted, cursive, impatient. A comparison with parish employee signatures identified it as belonging to Daniel Danny Rousseau, an independent FEMA contractor assigned to Bayonne Parish during the 2005-2006 recovery audits. Broussard froze when she read that name. Rousseau had been reported missing in 2007 while traveling to Baton Rouge for a deposition in a federal corruption inquiry. His rental car was found abandoned near the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge. No signs of foul play, no body recovered. The inquiry collapsed without him. The missing contractor and the missing cook had nothing in common, except Raymond Leclerc. She spent that evening reassembling the timeline. August 28, 2005. Marcus disappears during the storm. October 2006. Second drum buried under the bridge containing falsified FEMA paperwork. February 2007. Rousseau vanishes before testifying. Each event aligned with key points in the federal investigation into disaster fund misuse. What if Rousseau had discovered Leclerc's doctored invoices a year later and tried to blackmail him? What if Leclerc, or someone else, silenced him the same way Marcus had been silenced? Broussard pulled Rousseau's personnel file from the federal database. His last logged communication was an email sent from a hotel in Lafayette on February 12, 2007. Timestamped 9:12 p.m. Meeting Bayonne contact tomorrow morning. Then Baton Rouge, finally pinning this down. Attached was a scanned document, a ledger marked Pelican Bay Marina, fuel distribution audit. The attachment was corrupted, unreadable. The original device, a government-issued laptop, was never recovered. The next morning, Broussard visited Rousseau's younger sister, Claire, who still lived in Shreveport. Claire answered the door, holding a cigarette and a file folder that looked too clean to have been touched in years. Danny said someone down there got spooked, she told Broussard. Said if anything happened to him, check the bridge. Claire handed over a waterproof flash drive sealed inside a sandwich bag. He mailed this a week before he disappeared. I never opened it. Didn't want to know. The flash drive contained a single spreadsheet and a short video file. The spreadsheet itemized FEMA fuel shipments, all signed by Leclerc. The totals exceeded the marina's tank capacity by nearly 40%. The video, grainy but audible, showed a conversation recorded in a parked car. The dashboard clock read 10:08:06/1932. Rousseau's voice was cautious, professional. The other voice was unmistakably Leclerc's, raspy, defensive. "You got your numbers wrong," Leclerc said. Rousseau replied, "I got pictures of the bridge tanks, Ray. You pumped half your diesel into private storage. You're robbing the program blind. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about 700,000 gallons unaccounted for. That's federal time." A pause, the squeak of windshield wipers. "Careful," Leclerc said finally. "People drown down here every year." The recording ended there, static, cutting off the last word. Broussard forwarded the evidence to the State Attorney General's office. Within days, federal investigators reopened Rousseau's missing person file and reclassified it as homicide. Forensic analysts confirmed the documents from the second drum matched Rousseau's handwriting. DNA residue on the plastic bags contained a partial profile consistent with male, Caucasian, mid-40s, Rousseau's demographic. But another trace appeared on the inner rim of the drum, epithelial cells belonging to a different male, much older, matching Leclerc's previously collected sample. It placed both men handling the same container before it was sealed. The question that remained was who buried it. By 2006, Leclerc's health records indicated 2 hernia surgeries and limited mobility. He couldn't have hauled a 50-gallon drum into deep water alone. Broussard revisited witness lists from the marina cleanup crews and found one name recurring: Isaac Ike Dupre, a contract diver hired for salvage operations, now residing in Plaquemines Parish. His file noted a single prior arrest for assault and a history of working odd jobs along the coast. She found him at a trailer park behind a rusted seafood plant, sitting on his porch cleaning fishing nets. He was 50, leathery, with a smoker's cough and a faded tattoo of an anchor on his forearm. When Broussard mentioned the Blue Bridge, his eyes flicked sideways. "You worked for Leclerc," she said. "I worked for whoever paid." "Did he pay well?" "Paid cash." "What for?" "Moving junk out of the bay. After the storm there was plenty." "You ever move drums?" He looked at her for a long moment, then exhaled. "You folks already dug one up. Why you asking about another?" "Because I found it." His jaw tightened. "Then you already know." "Tell me anyway." He stared out toward the marsh. "Ray said it was just paperwork he needed gone. Said it'd rot if we left it in storage. I didn't ask questions. We loaded it into the skiff, dropped it where the bridge shadow hits the piling at sundown. He gave me $200 and a bottle of Jim Beam. I figured it was storm junk. Couple months later, some feds start asking about missing files, and Ray tells me to keep my mouth shut or I'd end up like the other one." "The other one?" "The kid. The cook." Broussard felt the hairs on her arms lift. "What did he say happened to him?" Ike's voice dropped. "Said the kid tried to rob him, fell off the dock. Said nobody would believe different." Then he smiled. "I stopped working for him after that. Where's Ray now, Ike?" "Dead, ain't he?" "Missing," he snorted. "Same thing down here." That evening, Broussard typed until her fingers cramped. Her report ran 20 pages, evidence chain, witness statements, material analysis. The conclusion was unavoidable. Leclerc had orchestrated an extensive FEMA fraud operation, killing Marcus Duvall to conceal early irregularities and disposing of Rousseau when the contractor uncovered the scheme. The drums served dual purposes, coffins and safes. But Leclerc hadn't acted alone. Someone had helped move, seal, and submerge them after 2006, long after his supposed drowning. She returned once more to the photograph. The Polaroid's perspective suggested it had been taken from the far embankment, accessible only by boat. A shadow near the lower edge hinted at a second person, broad shoulders, perhaps a duffel strap. Digital enhancement revealed a reflection in the water, a skiff, 2 figures aboard. One steering, one holding what looked like a camera. The timestamp matched Rousseau's recording within 4 days. Broussard realized then that the photo wasn't a threat. It was evidence left intentionally, perhaps by Rousseau himself, mailed years later from wherever he'd tried to hide it. Someone had kept it safe until now, someone who wanted the truth found. 2 weeks after submitting her report, the FBI dive unit expanded the search radius under the Blue Bridge. They recovered a third, smaller container wedged beneath collapsed debris, an airtight toolbox stamped with federal property codes. Inside were waterproof discs, backups of FEMA's 2005 audit data. On the top disc, a note in faded marker read simply, "For whoever's left when the water's gone." The data reconstructed every fraudulent transaction tied to Bayonne Parish, shell companies, false invoices, ghost employees. The total theft exceeded $12 million. Several of those shell entities, traced to offshore accounts registered to a logistics firm, dissolved in 2007. Its listed director was Raymond Leclerc. When Broussard delivered the findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the senior prosecutor asked what everyone in the room was thinking. If Leclerc faked his death, where's he been hiding 15 years? Broussard had no answer, but she kept seeing the last frame of the Polaroid, the flat horizon, the mirror-still water, and a faint ripple trailing away from the bridge as if something just beneath the surface had stirred. She began combing through coastal property records, searching for anyone using variations of Leclerc's handwriting on recent deeds or fishing permits. The break came from an unexpected source, a hurricane relief application filed in 2018 under the name Robert Landry, listing an address in Bayonne Parish and a signature almost identical to Leclerc's. The form requested reimbursement for a damaged bait freezer, exactly the model Leclerc used. By the time agents reached the listed property, the houseboat was gone, its mooring lines cut. Neighbors reported a quiet older man living alone, tending nets at night, always paying cash, vanishing for weeks at a time into the bayou maze. One remembered his dog tag chain glinting in the dusk. Stamped on it, though too distant to read, were letters that might have been R.L. Broussard stood on the dock that evening, watching the tide roll in. The water lapped against the pilings in slow, deliberate rhythm, as if breathing. Somewhere out there, she knew, the man who'd buried 2 drums and drowned a parish in silence was still afloat, carried by the same current that had hidden him all these years. And in her pocket, the Polaroid burned like a promise that the water would one day give him back too. By the time the Gulf birthed another storm in 2019, Bayonne Parish had learned to treat hurricanes like unwelcome relatives, expected, endured, and cursed in the same breath. The names changed, the faces of officials rotated, but the rituals stayed: plywood, sandbags, evacuation orders, the old ache in the bones that knew before the barometer did. Detective Althea Broussard had been promoted to lieutenant by then, heading the parish's cold case unit that barely had funding but infinite ghosts. She'd boxed up the Blue Bridge files 2 years earlier, not because she believed they were finished, but because the water had gone still again. Until, on the eve of another storm, the tide started talking back. It began with a phone call from Bayonne Parish Sheriff's Office. A drifter had been found unconscious near the levee, pulled from a capsized shrimp trawler. No ID, no wallet, lungs full of brackish water, face bloated by exposure. He'd muttered 2 words before losing consciousness: Blue Bridge. When Broussard arrived at the hospital, the man was still sedated, his left leg bandaged where a propeller blade had torn muscle. The chart listed him as Robert Landry, age approximately 70, address unknown. She stared at the man's face, thinner, more hollow, but familiar. The jawline, the scar above the right eyebrow, the deep-set eyes that refused to open. She pulled the 2005 driver's license photo from the file she'd carried in her coat pocket for 14 years. The resemblance was undeniable. Raymond Leclerc had returned, half-drowned but alive. For 48 hours, the doctors stabilized him. The Coast Guard reported the trawler had been registered under a false number traced to a boat rental in Port Sulphur, paid in cash by a man matching Leclerc's description. A local storm chaser had filmed the capsizing by chance, uploading the footage before evacuation. Broussard watched the clip frame by frame, a small boat listing against the surge, a man in a rain poncho wrestling with the controls, lightning flashing across the horizon. The storm was strong, but not enough to explain why he'd been out there at all. When Leclerc finally woke, Broussard was waiting. He turned his head slowly on the pillow, eyes half open, expression unreadable. "You came back," she said. He smiled faintly, voice rasping like sandpaper. "Tide brought me. You've been dead 14 years. Not dead. Just washed out." She leaned forward. "You ran from 2 murder investigations, Raymond. You forged federal documents. You buried men in drums. His eyes drifted to the window where rain streaked the glass. "That's a long time to hold your breath. You faked your drowning. I didn't fake anything. The water took what it wanted. I just didn't argue." Broussard placed the photograph, the Polaroid of the bridge, on his tray. "Who took this?" He studied it for a long while. "That's mine. Yours?" "I took it after the first storm. Before the second one hit. I wanted to remember what was gone." "You sent it to me?" He shook his head. "Didn't send it. Left it." "Left it where?" "In the tackle box under Dock 3. There was no photograph in that box." He closed his eyes. Then the tide found it first. For the next hour she questioned him gently, circling back through years of silence. He admitted forging invoices, diverting FEMA fuel shipments, paying locals in cash to keep quiet. He described the fear after Rousseau threatened exposure, the feeling of the water rising around every lie. But when she asked about Marcus Duvall, his gaze hardened. "The kid wasn't supposed to die," he said. "Then tell me what happened." "He came looking for money. I told him I didn't have it. He said he'd go to the sheriff. We argued on the dock. He slipped. Hit the piling. I tried to pull him up, but the current took him." "You sealed him in a drum." Leclerc's lips trembled. "He was already gone. I couldn't leave him for the gators. I was trying to give him a grave." "That's not what the evidence says." He didn't answer. That night, the storm made landfall, hammering the coast with rain that sounded like gravel on tin. The hospital lost power for 2 minutes before the generator kicked in. When it did, the bed in room 312 was empty, the IV line torn free. A nurse swore she'd seen the old man walking barefoot toward the stairwell. By the time deputies reached the levee, he was gone. The next morning, Broussard found a note under her windshield wiper written in the same deliberate block letters as Marcus Duvall's old note. "Some things you can't pull back up. No signature. Just a smudge of salt." For 3 days, the storm kept the parish isolated. Roads flooded, bridges closed. On the 4th, as waters receded, a fisherman radioed in a sighting. An abandoned houseboat grounded near the same marshland where Marcus's truck had been found 14 years before. Inside, officers discovered maps, notebooks, and a small metal case wrapped in oilcloth. Broussard opened it to find a collection of identification cards, all with Leclerc's face under different names. Among them, a Louisiana driver's license issued in 2015 under Robert Landry, address Pelican Bay Marina, Dock 2. He'd never left. The notebooks detailed fuel inventories, coded entries, and weather notes. But near the end of the final book, written in a shaking hand, were 6 lines that froze her. The boy didn't fall. "He came for the bridge key. He saw the tanks open. He saw me and Danny both. The storm took him first. I just helped it finish." Broussard sat alone on the porch of the houseboat as rain drummed the roof. She imagined Marcus stepping onto the dock that night, realizing the bridge draw was rigged to stay open, seeing 2 men moving fuel drums to a private barge. He must have shouted, threatened to call someone, maybe grabbed the bridge key in panic. In the scuffle, he'd been struck, knocked into the water. And when the storm came, Leclerc had sealed the evidence, including Marcus himself, beneath the bridge that was supposed to save the parish. The following week, the Coast Guard located another debris field 3 miles off Bayonne Point. Among twisted pilings and collapsed crab traps, divers found the remains of a second houseboat sunk intentionally with ballast chains. Inside were skeletal remains later confirmed as Daniel Rousseau's. A .38 revolver rested beside him, 1 chamber fired, fingerprints corroded beyond recovery. The autopsy suggested drowning, not gunshot, as cause of death. Whether Leclerc had pulled the trigger or simply let the water do it remained unknowable. Federal agents prepared a warrant for Leclerc's arrest on multiple counts, but by then he was once again a rumor carried by tide. Each new storm churned debris that might have been him. A boot, a rib, a shred of clothing, but nothing conclusive. The Bay refused to give up what it took. In 2020, Broussard transferred to Baton Rouge, accepting a desk position she didn't want. Still, every anniversary of the storm, she drove back to the bridge. She'd stand at the midpoint where the paint flaked like old skin, watching barges drift beneath. Some nights she swore she heard a chain scrape against metal below, a faint, hollow thud that could have been memory or current. Locals turned the story into folklore. The ghost of the line cook, the drowned bait man, The cursed bridge that opened by itself on windless nights. Teenagers parked nearby with beer and headlights off, daring each other to listen. The grown-ups avoided the subject, knowing the truth was worse than any ghost. Then, in the summer of 2023, a contractor dredging silt near Dock 3 unearthed a rusted toolbox marked with faded initials. RL inside were half a dozen coins, a pocket knife, and a waterproof cassette recorder sealed in wax. The batteries had long corroded, but the tape survived. Forensic restoration took months. When the audio finally played, the room fell silent. A man's voice, hoarse, measured, unmistakably Leclerc's. "If you're hearing this, the Bay finally told you where I went. I didn't mean for any of it to happen. The storm came, and I thought I could build something out of what it left. But it always takes back what isn't yours." Marcus was the first to see the cracks. He wanted to stop me. Danny wanted to use me. I buried both before they buried me. The bridge, she keeps count. Every time she opens, she remembers. The drums will come up when she's ready. Maybe that's justice enough. A long pause, then faint. Waves slapping wood. "Tell his mama I kept him close." Closer than she'd want. The tape ended there. Broussard submitted it as final evidence, the confession incomplete but sufficient. The U.S. Attorney's Office officially closed the Bayonne Parish cold case on December 14, 2023, 18 years after Marcus Duvall vanished. The cause of death was listed as homicide by drowning, suspect deceased. The public statement framed it as closure. But in Bayonne Parish, closure was a word that sank faster than any drum. On the evening the report was published, Broussard returned to the Blue Bridge one last time. The sky was bruised purple, the air still after rain. She walked to the midpoint and dropped a single white magnolia blossom into the water. It floated briefly, then spun in a slow circle and disappeared beneath the surface. Behind her, the first stars flickered in, mirrored on the dark water like eyes opening below. She listened for the old rhythm, the pulse of current against steel, the slow breath of the tide, and whispered into the wind, "It's done." But the water, patient as ever, said nothing back. The official report filed on December 14, 2023 should have been the end of it. The federal press release called the case a triumph of persistence and forensic innovation. News anchors in Baton Rouge and New Orleans repeated the same phrases: closure, resolution, accountability. But none of those words fit what Lieutenant Althea Broussard felt when she stood under the buzzing fluorescence of the evidence locker that night, staring at the recovered cassette sealed in plastic. The voice on that tape had lived inside her for months, that quiet, unhurried tone, like an undertaker reading a prayer. "Tell his mama I kept him close." Every time she closed her eyes, she heard it again. It wasn't remorse. It was ownership. She'd spent nearly 20 years chasing ghosts through the floodplains, but Leclerc had been different. He wasn't a monster hiding in plain sight. He was the plain sight. The ordinary, the reliable, the man who fixed things and opened bridges and smiled in photographs. The realization that evil could be indistinguishable from help was something she couldn't file under closed. The parish tried to move on. Pelican Bay Marina was condemned and fenced off, its docks collapsing into the channel. The bait shop's faded sign, "Live Shrimp, Cold Beer," hung sideways until a windstorm finally tore it loose. Developers announced plans for a new seafood processing facility, promising jobs and tax revenue. But when surveyors arrived with ground-penetrating radar, their machines malfunctioned at the exact midpoint between docks 2 and 3. "Interference," they said. Something magnetic below the silt. No one volunteered to dig. Broussard transferred again in 2024, this time to the State Cold Case Consortium in Baton Rouge, an office that lived inside a windowless annex between an auto body shop and a pawn store. Her title was senior consultant, but she worked mostly alone, reviewing files that no one wanted to touch. At night she took the long way home, driving past levees, recording field notes into a handheld mic. In April of that year, she received an unmarked envelope addressed simply to AB. Inside was a single photograph printed on glossy paper, the Blue Bridge at dawn. Its steel frame reflected perfectly on still water. Beneath it, written in ballpoint pen, "Check the ledger margins." Broussard pulled the old evidence ledgers from storage the next morning. The FEMA fuel spreadsheets, the maintenance logs, the personal notebooks found in Leclerc's houseboat, all of it catalogued and boxed. She flipped through each until she reached the smallest, a spiral pad bound with rusted wire. In the margins of the final page, barely visible beneath a smear of grease, someone had penciled a series of numbers: 29.6931N, 91.1745W coordinates. They led to a section of bayou 15 miles south of Pelican Bay, a nowhere place between two bends of the Atchafalaya Basin, reachable only by flatboat. Broussard filed no formal request. She went alone. The air was thick with gnats and motor oil. Spanish moss hung from the cypress like uncombed hair. She cut the engine and drifted until her GPS matched the coordinates. Beneath the water, something metallic glimmered faintly. Not a drum this time, but the corner of a submerged locker wedged between roots. She tied off the boat and slipped into the waist-high water. The mud clutched at her boots as she pried the object loose. It was a steel storage box, military issue, sealed with a corroded latch. Inside were three things: a rusted bridge key stamped Cottrell 02, identical to the one recovered 20 years earlier, a waterproof pouch containing a folded photograph, a younger man standing beside Leclerc in front of the marina, both smiling, each holding a fuel invoice. Written on the back, "For the record, partner, DR." A single page torn from a notebook, the handwriting unmistakably Leclerc's. It read, "The bridge keeps count. You pull one drum up, she buries another. You think you can measure the water, but it's been measuring you the whole time." D thought he could sell me out. Marcus thought he could stop me. You think you can close it, but you can't close what never ended. The tide don't forget its debts. Below the message, a crude drawing of the blue bridge. At its base, Leclerc had drawn 4 small circles. Not 2, not 3. 4. Broussard sat there for a long time as dusk crawled across the marsh. She checked the coordinates again. They matched exactly. The locker had been placed intentionally, not to hide evidence, but to leave a trail. It was an invitation. That night she filed an addendum to the 2023 case closure report. Recovered secondary evidence suggesting additional burial sites along Pelican Bay Channel. Recommend further hydrological survey. The request was denied within 24 hours. Insufficient probable cause, the district commander wrote. Case remains closed by order of the U.S. Attorney, so Broussard went back alone. In August 2024, she rented a sonar skiff under a friend's name and began sweeping the Bay Channel on her days off. 2 weeks in, her scanner picked up a perfect circle 20 feet below the mud line, the same diameter as the earlier drums. She marked the location, called no one, and returned the next morning with dive gear. The current was slow, the water dark. She reached the object by touch. Cold metal, half buried, lid fused by corrosion. She brushed away silt until her glove struck a second drum beside it. 2 more, just where Leclerc said they'd be. She surfaced gasping, rain starting to fall in slow, heavy drops. Something about the current felt different. A pull toward the bridge, gentle but insistent, as if the bay itself were turning over. She looked up. The blue bridge loomed against a bruised sky, its rusted trusses trembling with thunder. For a moment she could swear she saw a figure standing on the catwalk, a silhouette against lightning, watching. Then it was gone. Broussard didn't file another report. She left the sonar data in her desk, locked, and went back to work on other cases. But she kept dreaming of the bridge, its steel ribs, its echoing hum when the wind blew just right. In January 2025, a journalist from The Advocate requested an interview for a retrospective piece titled The Bayonne Files, Cold Cases That Changed Louisiana. Broussard agreed reluctantly. They met at a diner off Highway 90. The reporter was young, eager, recording every word. "Do you believe Leclerc was the only one involved?" he asked. She stirred her coffee. "No. You think someone helped him?" "I think the bridge did." He laughed, uncertain. "You mean metaphorically?" "Not anymore." The transcript of that interview went viral a week after publication. True crime enthusiasts dissected her words, turning them into podcasts, Reddit threads, and video essays. Some claimed the drums were part of a wider FEMA cover-up. Others said Broussard had lost her mind chasing ghosts. The state suspended her pending psychological review. She resigned instead, leaving her badge on the captain's desk and disappearing from public view. 3 months later, during routine maintenance, engineers inspecting the Blue Bridge's foundation discovered an air pocket under Piling 7. When they drilled through to relieve pressure, a rush of gas escaped, methane mixed with something foul. As the mud cleared, A diver's camera captured a flash of color. Red cloth, twisted around bone. The remains were later confirmed as Althea Broussard, missing since March 9, 2025. Her skiff was found drifting 2 miles upstream, empty, except for a waterproof recorder identical to Leclerc's. The tape inside was blank except for a few seconds of static. And then, faintly, a man's voice whispering through the hiss. Bridge closed at 10:03. After that, nothing. The state reclassified the file as unresolved accidental drowning. Officially, the Blue Bridge case was once again closed. Unofficially, no one crossed it after dark. Locals still tell the story, how, on certain storm nights, when the wind swings in from the Gulf, the bridge lifts by itself. The signal lights blink red against the rain, though no boats approach. And if you stand close enough to the water, you can hear 2 voices overlapping in the wind, one gravel rough, one steady and low, counting softly in time with the waves. 1 drum, 2, 3, 4, each number punctuated by the slow creak of chains rising from below. They say the bay keeps what it's owed, and the bridge, faithful as ever, keeps count.